What's up YouTube? This is Tony and welcome back to dev.py. This is where we're going to teach you how to code like a boss. In today's episode we're going to talk about Git. So let's get started. So what is Git? Git is a source control management software that you can use to manage your software. We constantly make changes to our code all the time. We may want to test out a new feature, we may want to write a new piece of code just to test something out. But eventually we need to save it somewhere and we need to manage it. And we may want to save all of these versions of code with different features in them in different places. And where can we do that? So Git was basically written to manage all of that for you and allow you to seamlessly update your code, refactor your code, pull it in, change it, do whatever you want with it on the fly. There could even be circumstances where you start working on your code and you mess up and you might need to revert back to an older previously working version of code. And so that's what Git ultimately is it allows you to manage your source code in a way that allows you to go back and forth in time, update things, seamlessly, and ultimately allow a team of developers to work on the same project at once as well if you wanted. Working with Git with a team of developers allows you to post things called merge requests, where say I'm working with a team of 3 or 4 developers and we're all working on the same piece of code, but we're all adding different things to it. I can post a merge request of my code to merge my code into the main base of code, and before it's done, before it's merged in, you can actually review those changes with a team of developers and get feedback and find problems and errors. So Git's very handy for managing your code and collaborating with others. Another really cool feature of Git is something called pipelines, which is basically an automated method of executing jobs with your code. It allows you to do really cool things like deploy your code to environments or package it or scan it for security vulnerabilities. Really, really cool, really advanced features that Git enables you to do. So we're not going to cover and go into all of that today. There will be a series of videos on how to do that in the coming weeks. But today we're going to show you how to get started with Git, how to install it on your computer, and how to use it in its basic functions. Okay, so to get started, first you want to go to the Git website. So it's Git as GIT is what it's called, Git, not GET. So the website you'd want to go to is git-scm.com. So Git, sourcecontrolmanagement.com. And here's the home page of Git. And basically the very first thing you want to do is go to the download section and find the relevant instructions on how to install Git locally onto your machine. In my case, I'm on a Mac, and so I'm going to go to Mac OS. And with Mac, you can use the Brew packaging software to install Git onto your machine. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to copy this, and then we'll go and just paste it into our terminal. Okay, so I'm going to copy that in here, and we're going to run brew install git, and it's going to install Git for me on my Mac. Okay, and this is what it looks like once it's completed installing. You can validate that it's been installed properly by doing a git-help or git-help, and it will load up all of the commands that are available to you to validate that you installed Git properly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to clone our first repository. And so what cloning means is, say for instance, I want to take a copy of this repository and save it locally. What I can do is I can go to the repository page, just like I'm on the dev.py repository, and if you see this code button on the right here, it gives you options to clone the code down. Now there's a bunch of ways that you can clone the code down. With HTTPS, all you need to do is sign in with your username and password when it asks for it. So, for instance, let me just see here. I'm going to do make directory. Here, let me change over here. So I'm going to do make directory test. And I'm going to change directory. And I'm going to do a git clone, and then I'm going to paste in that HTTPS link, and it cloned into Python. So if I look, I now have a Python folder in this directory, and that's the cloned repository from GitHub. So if I look in the Python directory, you can see the episode 3 in the README file there. If I cat the README file, oops, I'm going to change into the Python directory and then cat the README file. That's basically the instructions of the README file. That's what's on the website. If we transition back, you can see that there's my README file. So that's what I just copied. This repository was just copied into my machine using HTTPS. All I did was hit the copy button here, and then here I'll go back to the terminal. All I did here was a git clone and then pasted in that HTTPS link, and it cloned that whole repository into my machine in this directory. So if I go back out one, I created a test directory and then cloned the repository, my Python repository, into my test directory. So that's how you can clone projects into your directory. This is the actual cloned repository. So this is a special directory that's on your machine, which means you can actually use git commands directly inside of your terminal to manage the code directly instead of using the IDE. We'll get to the IDE next, but first let me show you what you can do with the code. So one of the basic commands is git branch. And you can see that I'm currently on the main branch. And so say for instance, I wanted to, this is basically the main base code, the main code base that's in my repository, right? All of the episode 3 folder, the README file, all sorts of stuff is in here. But let's say I wanted to make a change, and I wanted to add a file to my repo. So let's, this is episode 4, so let's make a directory called episode 4. Oh, well first, yeah, let's just do that for now. We'll get into branches later. So I'm making a directory called episode 4. And I'm going to change directory into episode 4. And I'm going to just make a file that's going to be test readme. Readme.md, markdown. And I'm just going to do test readme. And I'm going to save that. And now we have a test readme folder inside the episode, or excuse me, I have a test readme file in the episode 4 folder in my Python repo. So now I made a change. I made a change to the repository. I added a directory and I added a file. Well, this is a special Git repository locally on my machine. So Git, the software that I installed earlier, is paying attention to all of the changes that I'm making in this directory right now. And it hasn't saved any of those changes yet, not to the repo. So, for instance, before I do anything, let's transition back. If I refresh the dev.py page, there's no episode 4 folder here yet. I say yet because I haven't pushed my changes yet. So that's what this is all about. So if I transition back, what we can do is a command called git status. And, oh, let me go back. So if I go back to the base directory and I do git status, it sees that there's a new untracked file called episode 4. There's an episode 4 folder that exists now. And so in this case, I want to actually save that folder in my repository. I want to add it. Currently, it's not added. It's an untracked file, but I want to make it a tracked file. So I'm going to do git add, and then I'm going to add the episode 4 directory. Well, now once I've added it, if I do a git status again, it sees it as a new file. And not only does it see the new directory, but it added the test readme file to the repo for me. Typically, if you add like an empty folder in Git, it doesn't necessarily detect it because just having an empty directory doesn't do anything technically. So Git may or may not read it like it's something new, for instance. But the fact that there's actually content within that directory instructs Git that, hey, there's an actual, new file that we need to track and, need to do something with. We want to, if we're adding it to the repo, we want to add it now. We see it and we recognize it. So that's what this is all about. So now that I've added, or I've staged these changes to be pushed into my repository, now I need to commit those changes. These are the changes that I want to make. So I want to commit them. So git status. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this. So git commit, and you do -m for message. You always have to put some sort of commit message in indicating what you're adding. So I'm adding episode 4 folder and test readme file. There it is right there. Let me try git diff now. Yeah, it's still not doing anything. So I think the git diff isn't showing anything because it's not actually comparing it with an existing file. Because these files are net new, it's not really diffing anything because they're net new. Git diff is actually kind of handy if you're editing a file. And I'll show you a working example of that later. But now that we've committed our change, now I want to push this change. And so if I do git push, now I need to sign in with GitHub into my account so that it will authenticate my request. So something that you're going to have to do if you're using the HTTPS method is you can't actually use your username and password. You have to use something called a personal access token. And so in GitHub, the way you get that is you go to your account settings, and then on the left you'll see developer settings, and then on the left you'll see personal access tokens, and then you can generate a new token that you can then use. Okay, so I was able to successfully push my changes into the repo using a personal access token. Once I generated one, you put your normal username in like you normally would, but for the password you use the token. You don't use your normal password that you use to sign in to GitHub. And as you can see here, after I logged in, you see it was enumerating objects, compressing objects, writing, and then it pushed it to the main source code branch. So now if we go back and look at the repo, and if I refresh, oh, it's actually refreshed already. You could see the episode 4 folder was added here, and it has our test readme file in it. So that's an example of how you can use GitHub to save the changes to your repository and save all of your changes to your code. Later on, we'll dive into more advanced features of Git. Next, we're going to talk about branches in the next video and how you can branch off different features and changes into Git. And then we'll also talk about merge requests more. We talked a little bit about it at the beginning of the video. And then, go on from there. So this is pretty much the basics of Git. Cloning the repositories into your machine locally, so you have your local version of the repo, and then updating a repository with new folders or file changes or code changes and things of that nature. And then we'll actually get to the point where we're modifying code, and I'll show you a good working version of the git diff command, and we'll go through all the commands as we go. So that's pretty much it. If you want to stay up to date on all the training and content coming from dev.py, you can follow us on Twitter at dev.py. You can also follow us at dev.py.com. This is a website where you can also get up-to-date information on all the training material and content coming from dev.py. And if you want to stay up to date on all of the code examples that we go through on our episodes, you can go to the dev.py GitHub. And if you like today's content, please don't forget to like and subscribe on the dev.py YouTube channel.